In this series of lectures, we are going to look at the labels used on cannabis products and dive into a little bit of the analytical chemistry behind them. So we'll start just with labels and how to read them and the information that's actually present on them. So in all of the examples that we'll use in these lectures will be for Washington State. And if you search up the WAC 314-55-105, you'll find all of the regulations around packaging and labeling cannabis products. And so there's a link to this in our optional reading if you're curious to dive into it, but it's going to control the information that's required to be on the labels that are on flower and also concentrates and edible products. So let's start with an example first of just a flower product. I'm going to highlight a few things while we do this. So first of all, there is always going to be information about the strain. And here, in this case, this is AK-47. There's also usually information about the origin of that cannabis plant and an identifying number that tracks the grower to the extractor to the seller, if we're looking at like a cannabis concentrate. And so we can see that some of those identifying numbers are present here right off the bat, where it's being sold, and also the Cowlitz County cannabis that it worked on it, and right here. And so right off the bat, it's kind of a history of where that flower came from and what steps along the way it took and which businesses touched that product on its way to you. Okay, so next, you'll usually see on labels information about the actual potency for different cannabinoids. And this is usually what people are scanning for when they're looking at these labels. And so this one puts THC right here. And sorry, it starts with CBD, gives CBDA and CBD content. And then it gives THC and THCA content. It also gives total THC and total CBD as well, and then total cannabinoids following that. It also will give, so along with the strain name, it usually gives the indica versus sativa versus hybrid. So here we have our type, it's a sativa dominant hybrid. And so the information that I kind of want to unpack a little bit more rather than the different businesses involved in the production of this is the piece that tells us about potency. And so this is pretty interesting because like how these numbers are developed is actually pretty complicated, or at least a challenge. So first, let's start with the total cannabinoids present. When that number is listed, it's supposed to represent the THCA, the THC, the CBDA, CBD, but also any of the variants on CBG, CBN, CBC, or the variants on THC or CBD that are like THCV, where they have a shorter alkyl chain. And so that should represent that. The total active cannabinoids is sometimes listed on a label, not always. It's not required. And this is really looking at just the cannabinoids that are already decarboxylated. So that's going to be things like THC and CBD, but not THCA or CBDA. These still have the carbon bonded to two oxygens and a hydrogen that through the decarboxylation process will be removed from the molecular structure as carbon dioxide. And that activates it. And so that's why you'll see it labeled as total active cannabinoids. The total THC and the total CBD content is typically what a consumer is looking at when evaluating a product. And so I want to dive into how that number is actually determined a little bit more. So I've written out the equations that actually produce that value. It isn't just adding the THCA and the THC to calculate the total THC in the flower. Um, Instead, the percent THCA is actually multiplied by this value 0.877 right here. And this is correcting for the difference in mass between THCA and THC, which is that CO2, the carbon and two oxygens. It's 44 grams per mole difference between these two compounds. And so the percentage that we're looking at here is a mass percent. And so we have to correct for the fact that these molecules weigh different amounts when we're looking at overall concentration, and correct for that. So this means that these total THC representations are assuming that all of the THCA will convert into THC when it's consumed. All right. The other thing I was going to note here is this percent THC and just the percent THCA, and give a brief reminder of what these numbers really mean. So that percentage is going to be so percent THC is equal to the grams of THC that are present in every gram of the dried flower, and then times 100. And so in this case, it really means that we have, like if we had 20% THC, this would mean that we had 0.2 grams of THC for every 1 gram of flour. And you times it by 100 just to get that percentage. So typically we see concentrations for percent THC for a flower product ranging anywhere from 0 or really low, all the way up to 20, above 20 to 30, and a few trailing off, possibly with higher concentrations. And so this percent THC equation is also how we would calculate the percent THCA, except it's looking specifically at the carboxylate form and what is the mass of that present in the flower. This lecture series will later talk with how on earth do you take a flower from a plant and determine how much THC is in it, let alone THCA. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more detail later. So now let's look at the percent CBD. The equation is the same as our percent THC for our total amount. And so again, this percent CBD is telling us the grams of CBD present in 1 gram of the flower times 100. And the percent CBDA is telling us the grams of CBDA per 1 gram of the flower. And then we are multiplying it by this 0.877 to correct for the mass difference in the molar masses of our CBDA versus our CBD. Now, this value is the same as with THC because CBD and THC have the same chemical formula. So they have the same mass. And adding another CO2 to that mass will give us the same percentage difference between the two. So this is what the total THC means. It's basically correcting for mass and taking the total of both THC and THCA to give you that total percentage within your flower. Let's now look and compare it to some other labels from Washington for other cannabis products. They're all going to be pretty similar because the labels and the regulations around them are going to apply similarly, with a few changes. So here's a concentrate label, and this one actually has more information than many of them do. So we'll see the same things we were seeing before. when we were looking at just the dried flower. We're going to see a THC content. We're going to see a THCA content, CBD content, and CBDA content, and then a total cannabinoid. And you'll note that even if we perform our total THC and total CBD calculation, the total cannabinoid value here is 69.00%. This is larger than the sum of the listed cannabinoids. So this value is actually giving us absolutely everything. So maybe there are some of the cannabinoids that are not actually listed in other parts of the label, like maybe CBG or maybe THCV. I mean, it could be a lot of different things because there are a lot of cannabinoids. So that value is going to represent everything that would fall into that same structural pattern. But there's some other information along here. We see, like before, all of the information about the different companies that worked on producing this product and selling this product. And we have information about the product itself. So we have the name of the cartridge and the mass of the concentrate that is present within it, which is 1 gram. So a little bit of other extra information that happens to be on this label, which I think is kind of cool, is let's grab another color. First of all, we could see our total THC content right here and our total CBD content right here. These are those totals with the applying the equation to our THCA of multiplying it by 0.877. This also tells us about some of the other cannabinoids present. There is CBDV present in this sample, and that is going to be a molecule that's the same as CBD, but the alkane chain, that's usually 5 carbons long, will be shorter. There's also CBC present at 1.6% and CBG at 1.3%. What is unique about this label is that it also highlights the terpenes that are present. And so here we have about 7% of this is terpenes, and then it lists the 3 at least highest ones present within the sample coming from the strain of cannabis that this extract is extracted from. This concentrate is extracted from. And so this information wasn't on the flower example that we looked at. Anytime you are analyzing your product to understand what is present within it, getting more and more detailed testing is costly. And so if it isn't required, not all companies are going to take the extra steps to see if there is like to understand and communicate the terpene profile that they expect the product to have, or what they have seen in the sampling. So that is this one. Let's look at one more. Let's look at an edible example. This one's always a lot simpler. Well, it's less simple in that there's a whole bunch of ingredients that are now listed. Corn syrup, vanilla beans, things like that. And we also see that our addition of cannabis alcohol extraction. So that is going to be our extract that's coming from our cannabis. There is more information on here on the label right here that gives us more information about the amount of THC and CBD within it. And so we could see here, we've got a THCA read, a THCA reading, a THC reading, a CBD, and a CBDA reading for this. And I've tried to blow this up here. And so what we're seeing is for THC, we're seeing 5 milligrams. And for CBD, we're seeing 5 milligrams. The CBDA and the THCA, there's 0. if this product or the edibles manufacturing required applying heat at any point in its production, then that THCA and CBDA would be converted into THC and CBD. So it's not surprising to not see a balance of those two and instead see just THC and just CBD. And so we also see that these are just 5 milligrams because this is an edible. There's regulations on about how much can be on it. This can be up, I think, up to 10 milligrams. And so when it's being produced so that each piece will have a very specific dosage to it. And so you don't see variation like you would see in a cannabis concentrate or in a cannabis flower. They'll always be 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, or 2.5 milligrams, or 1 milligram, something along those lines. But then there's lots of other information on here too, mostly around the actual food product that was created. And on the front label, it's also really upfront about what users are getting. So it says right here, 5 CBD and 5 THC for a total of 10 milligrams. And so it's giving that total 10 milligrams for both of those two cannabinoids. And for this one, we're not seeing percentages. So we don't see a percent because this product is designed to be eaten all at once, right? And so that dosage we can assume is evenly distributed within the product. Whereas some other product like a flower is something that might be consumed over multiple or be consumed at multiple points in time. And while this covers just 3 of the main kind of types of products that are out there, there's lots of others, especially within the general sphere of concentrates. But other concentrates like shatters and butters and jams and things like that, they'll all typically follow the same guidelines that you're seeing for the vape cartridge example that we looked at.